My guest today is the author of This, is a wonderful friend who has constant contributions to the world of well-being. Her passion is really to help people find joy. Dr. Neeta Bhushan.
I had no idea if this dark cloud would ever let up because that was literally my entire childhood. But what I did know, my coping mechanism was, all right, overwork, overcompensate, overachieve. And so a year after my mom died, my brother DJ, he had an asthma attack and fully collapsed. And they took him, they tried to revive him, but there was no chance.
That is very triggering, especially when life has not been easy, right?
If we are looking at some of the factors that help us bounce, then we can not only bounce, but be able to fly forward. These hardships can turn into magical moments if we allow them to.
Welcome back. My guest today is the author of This, That Sucked. Now What? Dr. Neeta Bhushan is an inspirational speaker, an author, a podcast host. I was on her podcast. I will be on her podcast. We recorded myself and Alice for Unstressable, my book, which is coming out, our next book, which is coming out in end of April. So Neeta will release somewhere mid-April on the podcast that's called The Brave Table. Was a very interesting conversation, so I urge you to go there. Neeta is a wonderful friend who has constant contributions to the world of well-being, and her passion is really to help people find joy in difficult times. And I think it shows from the title of the book. The subtitle is How to Embrace the Joy in Chaos and Find Magic in the Mess. I think we are at a time, Neeta, where there is a lot of mess in the world. So very timely indeed. The book was out in 2023, February, if I remember correctly. The paperback is out in January this year. Lovely, lovely read. But let's spend some time to talk about it. First of all, thank you for the time, and thank you for doing this when you're jet lagged. When were you back?
No, I got back on Friday, actually, Thursday night. So
that's not too bad.
Friday.
That's the fourth day now, right?
Yeah, okay, it's the fourth day.
My experience is that the worst day is the fourth day, actually.
Is it really?
Yeah. So the fourth day, I basically, this is when I normally make up my mind that I will never travel again. And then, you forget on the fifth day, as you know. So
this is, and I kind of feel like the experience of emotional roller coasters, like, oh my gosh, where am I? What am I doing? So it's I'll keep you posted.
Very good. So I know you were traveling for a reason, but I think maybe if you're open to the idea, the book gives it away. Like, that sucked. Now what? What sucked? Would you mind telling us why you decided to write this?
Yeah. So I have had many sucky moments, and that would be an understatement. There's a paragraph in the book where if they were giving, an EGOT for, the awards for it, I'd probably win some sort of the Trauma Olympics or something like that. And not that, this is by any means a competition. I had gone through a lot of early losses, and having born and raised with Filipino Indian parents in the States, they kind of migrated, for that air quotes American dream. They were really hard workers, and I was the, oldest of 3 kids. And of course, being the oldest daughter, there's a lot of these unsaid obligations. They came from the East, etc. And also, I think that there was, of course, this pressure. And so by the time I was 10, I became a caretaker to my mom. And my mom had gone through various iterations of what was breast cancer at the time. And then literally from 10 to 16, I would spend my evenings, weekends, she would be in and out of hospital settings. And so that was really kind of the core upbringing for me. And my two younger brothers were, I was 10 and they were 8 and 5. And so at 16, the cancer had spread to her lungs and she transitioned. And so, kind of family dynamics at the time, my dad was this Punjabi, stern Indian man. And in that culture, it's not known for a male widow to, kind of
Grief.
take on the responsibilities of 3 kids, let alone 3 kids under 16. And he went into the severe depression. I think there's a lot of stigma with, how do you function in society, et cetera. And I was always told I'm resilient, I'm strong. And so I had a very good idea of what resiliency was. For me, it meant strong. Neeta, you're strong. You have this. You're the eldest. And so again, a lot of internal pressure. And so a year after my mom died, my brother DJ was 15 years old and he was coming out of his high school and he had an asthma attack and fully collapsed. And they tried to revive him, but there was no chance. He had transitioned that day. And that happened to be on my youngest brother's 12th birthday. And so that, again, it was a year after my mom had transitioned. So a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of loss, so sudden. We couldn't wrap our heads around it, honestly. And the only thing my father knew what to say and kind of how to cope with this excruciating pain was, all right, straight A's, work, go to school. And that became my coping mechanism. And not only that, I learned early on how to, I guess, deal with family dynamics and human connection. I was able to, because I didn't really have a normal childhood. My dad, he really tried his best to make sure that we were having friends. And even at 16, 17, teenagers are already cruel. They don't really know what to say when you're going through loss. And all you want to do is actually fit in. And I remember there were times, especially during this period, where I would have my friends just come over and it would just be, they would be singing or we'd be playing board games. And there was some sense of normalcy. I remember wanting to escape so many times and now having the pressure of I'm the only female in the house. And that meant to work 1, 2, 3 jobs to help my dad put food on the table. And then 2 years after that, we had the diagnosis that my father had stage 4 lung cancer. They found an inoperable tumor. And that was the doctor said that he had 10 months to live. And he sure lived up until those 10 months. And so just shy of my 19th birthday, I was 18, I found myself orphaned. And now the person taking care of my youngest brother, who was 14 at the time. And so this time before I kind of spearheaded into my 20s, there was a big, huge sense of what am I meant to do? What is this all about? What is this world? What is this all about? And so I remember early on questioning even faith, of course. And I even write about the first part of my book. I write about, the chip on your shoulder. Sometimes when things happen or when you have, it may not be a loss, it may be a setback, a challenge, you didn't get the promotion, et cetera. You worked so hard on something. And now you have this kind of vigor, these wings almost on your back to say, okay, I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And that was kind of this sense that I felt that I wanted to take my younger brother and I out of this dark cloud. And honestly, I had no idea if this dark cloud would ever let up because that was literally my entire childhood. But what I did know was, okay, I went on to dental school because my coping mechanism was, all right, overwork, overcompensate, overachieve. And of course, it's part of my tiger parent upbringing as well.
Mm.
So I spearheaded into my 20s. I went to dental school, and uh, we did do some therapy, some talk therapy. We had an enormous amount of family around us, but that really started to shape um, my, intentions, my goals in life, which were all outward success. It was outward achievements, accolades. The ego was really driving it in many ways. But it was a survival mechanism. It was how to not feel the enormous amount of pain, especially because early on I was told, okay, you're a warrior, Neeta, you got this. And so I was just like bulldozing and charging through. And so in I would say my mid to late 20s, I would find love. And that's one of the areas that I was probably not the most adept, meaning that I was so afraid of being alone that I would attach myself to these interesting, unhealthy, and even sometimes toxic relationships. And so, to the point of in my late 20s, I get married, and we have, these amazing trappings of success. I have, all the lavish, etc. things, and everyone in our family circle, you're the one that's the golden child that everybody kind of compares everyone else to. It's like, you've made it, you've done it, because I had a booming practice. I wasn't even 30 at the time. You know, graduated all of the things, and I was a cosmetic dentist, and I was married. And I remember vividly, December 31st, this was 2011, where I had this overwhelming amount of just anxiety and fear and just rage and all of these feelings that started to bubble up. And it was some of those same feelings that I put away in a back closet when they told me my mom's cancer spread to her lungs and her brain and they couldn't do anything about it. When they told me my dad had stage 4 lung cancer and that he only had 10 months to live. When I found out that my brother, had taken his last breath. And this feeling of, oh my goodness, I know something is going to happen, this change, and I don't really feel safe.
Yeah.
That was December 31st, 2011, where I looked at myself in the mirror and I looked at all of the trappings of success, and I felt that I was spiritually dead. Physically, I was in a very toxic situation. And that was the first time I admitted to myself. I looked in the mirror in my master bedroom and I said, I need help. Because for the first time ever, I thought, okay, I'm strong. Everyone's been telling me I'm strong. I'm strong my whole life. But this is the first time I was allowing myself to break and let people in. And that would then open the doors and this cascade of the next 7 years of my life, where it would be all around full breakdown and full allowing myself to heal and letting people in, and the closest people to me, who, of course, everyone knew that I was in this kind of situation, but didn't really know because I was keeping things and shoving things under a rug. And so that was, I guess I would say, my first awakening into these sucky moments, but to say, all right, now what? Now what? That has happened. And for me, this now what piece really looked like the beginning formations of what I talk about in the book, which is called your bounce factor. And it's really this, internal foundation of what happens to us after these sucky moments, and not just for us to be strong, air quotes, so that we can rise up again, but what happens when we actually can bounce back? Because the actual Latin root of the word resiliere is to bounce.
Mm.
And if we are looking at some of the factors that help us bounce, then we can not only bounce, but be able to fly forward through some of the obstacles and also begin to integrate those pieces.
I want to first just visit some of those emotions, which I think are very important for. I always tell people before you go into thinking about what you can do, there is a lot that is found in the sense of awareness of how hard life can be, right? And for many of us, uh, we don't imagine uh, that our own test is not the most difficult test out there. When in reality, when you look at the stories of life of others, it's just somehow always quite challenging. There is always someone who has a bigger challenge than us. And I'm so many of my listeners will know that in the last few weeks, I first lost my sister-in-law, which was truly, truly, truly my sister, and so much love that she brought into my life 40 some years, and she left us. As a result of a heart attack when she was taking care of my sick brother who was diagnosed with several cancers. And then, a few weeks later, as we observed his recovery and, doing better after maybe a year of treatment, something completely out of the blue, just takes him from us. And I get a lot of people that will tell me that, losing Ali, my son, and then losing two of my closest, people. And then a week later, my mom falls and breaks a few bones and so on. And you think, people look at me and go like, oh my God, you're so resilient. Oh my God, this is, we hope you have strength. And I always say, well, I have to say, I'm sure there are others who are going through rougher than this and much tougher lives than this. And when you tell your story of having to go through 3 losses in 4 years,
Mm.
at age 16, and to have to really attend to your sick mother since age 10, that is by far like 100 times more challenging than what I have to go through when I'm in my 50s, having seen life and so on. So my question is very straightforward. It seems that for most of us who have gone through those kinds of tragedies or traumas, life tends to look a little easier afterwards. It's almost as if we sort of like, yeah, you know, you look back at it, and as you tell your story, it feels that you still love your life somehow, that you're still grateful for your life somehow, that you look back at all of this and it's not, you're not victimizing yourself somehow. And I found that those who go through more uh, of life's tests tend to find more joy in life in general and more appreciation for the fact that life comes with a lot of tests. Is that something that you would share?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I think that you cannot take the joy out of me.
Exactly, right?
I think that, well, and to your point, I think that, you know, even with my subtitle, How to Embrace the Joy in Chaos and Find Magic in the Mess, I think at the end of the day, you know, it, it's really about the duality and the paradox of some of these really big, heavy emotions. And I honestly couldn't quite, obviously, I didn't have the language for it while going through, multiple tragedies. But take, for example, any listener that's listening to you right now, maybe they're thinking and they're going through this thinking, wow, I just had a breakup, or I'm going through
Yeah,
a divorce, or I just had a friend breakup and this was my best friend for several years, or there was some sort of a betrayal. These are still losses.
of
They're
course.
still losses. And they will have this like soupy mix of complex emotions. And why are they complex? Well, because we sometimes villainize even feeling these really big emotions where
Yeah.
it's so easy for us to numb and distract and avoid and bury ourselves in work and do any of the addictions. I know I fell into the addiction of just working. And
Hmm.
that was a coping mechanism. And I know many of us overachievers or high achievers, we tend to do this to avoid pain or, for proving ourselves, et cetera. And not that it's a bad thing, it's just a coping mechanism. And so to be okay with grief or to be able to feel the bigness of grief, then we should be able to feel its opposite, the bigness of joy. And I remember, Mo, one of the, times when I was in my teenage years, and of course I was still a teenager. Of course I was still going to have little crushes on people. And I remember one day, going to visit my mom after school because I grew up in Chicago, and it was on the way home. And I remember there was a boy, at the coffee shop, and I still remembered going to see my mother, who was mostly dying in the ICU, but I was still able to get butterflies in my stomach because I saw this,
Mm.
this boy at the coffee shop, and he smiled at me or something like that as a 16 or 15-year-old, right? And so to be able to feel again the paradox of those emotions. And there were times even throughout some of those phases, the loss of my brother, where it's like I did not want to feel, I did not want to go to see a movie with my friends. I did not want to go to a concert. And I remember vividly my dad said, "No, you will go."
Mm.
Because we couldn't be in this, there's only so much of this cloud of deep sadness that you can be in for so long, so that we can experience this contrast of life, because all of us are going to have several iterations of this human experience. And I used to have this kind of in psychology, it's like this survivor's guilt of
Yeah.
like, you know why my brother and why not me?
Yeah.
And what's the and so you even overcompensate on that level, and I shouldn't be feeling good for myself because my dad just went and lost two really big people in his life. And so and this is where a lot of us, people pleasers or givers or martyrs, if we have this archetype, we kind of run ourselves to the ground thinking that we don't deserve love, we're not worthy of it, or that we have to somehow work even harder to prove ourselves worthy.
Yeah. Do you remember, your 20s in comparison to your friends? You hosted me and Alice the other day, and
It was
Alice again
amazing.
had several losses in her life. And, she would always tell the story about how she sometimes would, drink, for example, in her 20s. Most of her friends would be drinking to have fun, and she would be drinking to escape, right? To sort of almost numb that constant despair of why is life doing this to me? Why is it me and not everyone else?
Hmm. Yeah.
How were your 20s? Were you um, only working? What was going on?
So it's interesting, and I talk about this in the book. When I turned 20, this was a year after my dad died, and I remember so vividly. I wanted to escape. I
Yeah,
wanted to escape this dark cloud that literally was with me since, I mean, the most formative years of my life, since I was 10.
yeah,
And I didn't know any better, but I just knew my soul was really, it's like I needed to get out of this bubble of Chicago and just where I was. And I ended up going to college in Chicago, Loyola University, Chicago, and they had other campuses globally. And I remember seeing in, the bathroom stalls, they used to have these like flyers with, the numbers that you take out, and it says, apply here if you want to go and study abroad this summer, and in Roma, Italy.
Mm.
And I said, oh my gosh, this might be a sign. It
Mm.
was one of those things. And I'm like, I need to, I need to get out of here. And I remember having to convince my Filipino grandmother and my Indian bua, which is who I was sharing and mentioning about before, my dad's sister, who to actually take care of my youngest brother if I would go away. And they were my matriarchs. And they were like, you are not, there's no way. We just had, how can you even think about leaving when we've had all of this grief and loss? And I said, no matter what, I am going. And I just felt the urge. And as soon as I got the admission slip and in a scholarship to go, I said, I'm out
Yeah.
because there's something just begging in my soul to leave. And so at 20, this is the first time I stepped foot not only in somewhere where I just do not know a lick of Italian, in a very new place, which is, none of my friends, were there with me. It was me by myself with, hundreds of other students all around the world. And for the first time, I got to be Neeta without having this label
Of
of
course. Yeah.
she's the one that had
Oh,
the
yeah.
losses. She's
Yeah.
the one, have you heard her story? And because it was a big thing for young people,
Yeah.
obviously. And I got to just be, hi, I'm Neeta. I'm from Chicago.
Yeah.
And it was like this sense of freedom that I never tasted, I never knew. I had this weight had lifted off of my shoulders. Like I didn't have to worry about these weird calls in the middle of the night if somebody was not breathing or if they had to do something to one of my family members, or, you just have this visceral central nervous system response constantly. And I felt like for the first time, I could actually be a kid, a teenager. And I remember going to the Coldplay concert because they were playing in Rome, and it was just, I felt like I was, on top of the world because I got to choose what my story was. And it was also, so I was there also, I started to take Italian literature and Italian philosophy. And it was the very first time I was exposed to, the work of the Italian philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca,
Mm.
and Stoicism. And I remember having to really write my first essay on what that meant and how it has shaped our lives in some way. And that was the first, meaning the amor fati that came up during that semester abroad, which was the love of one's fate. And that stuck with me because, instead of cursing my fate or just wishing that I hadn't gone through any of this, that I was wishing I could just be a normal teenager to fit in, especially and having these like conversations because it would still come up. Hey, where are you from? What do your parents do? And then I knew, and this is part of, the bounce factor that I now teach, which is be able to make peace with your past, forgive your past, be able to understand and appreciate your upbringing, which is, the love of one's fate, amor fati. And that was one of the big things that I really got. And that fully kind of shifted the trajectory of my life. You asked about, certain kind of numbing behaviors that I had. I think the biggest thing for me, having watched, all three of my family members pass on through medical diseases that were out of my control, I became a uh, wellness, I want to say, addict.
Mm.
I was I think I was very much so rigid for myself. I,
Yeah.
I, I was,
Normally
I was
happens. Yeah.
not I wasn't, I even was one of those who would judge other people for drinking or putting harmful things into their body because
Mhm.
I firsthand knew some of those effects. So I had very much a very opposite response. But what I did have was this like wanderlust of travel. Now, 62 countries in, I
Oh,
still
wow.
do have that wanderlust for travel and experiences. But what the biggest thing that I would say in my 20s was my pattern in relationships. And this was male relationships and this idea of holding on and then overlapping relationships because of this fear of never wanting to be alone. And so I would
Mhm.
remember always having a group of friends around, and it was very easy for me to make friends and connect because at an early age, I had to learn how to make my parents feel really good, especially in these super uncomfortable positions that they were in hospital settings. And so that was, I think, to this day, still a gift of mine is to help people feel seen and heard, but of course, at the detriment of myself
Mm.
and, putting myself last because I always heard, and this is a very like, Indian, Filipino, Asian upbringing saying is your happiness is other people's happiness, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Your happiness is when you see everybody else happy. And I never understood really what self-love or this idea of coming back home to your own sovereignty. I never understand what that meant until the next break.
Mm.
So, which I would probably say, then entering my 30s was this huge radical um, earthing of all of these concepts of what I thought unconventional career looked like and this linear path to, air quotes, success. Because all I knew growing up was doctor, dentist, lawyer, engineer. And
So Asian.
it's so Asian.
I
I
mean,
mean,
we do the same too in the Middle East. It's like if you're not a doctor and not an engineer, what are you doing? Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
and so I think that when I reached this breaking point of when my life was threatened, I had to haphazardly leave in the middle of the night. And in the introduction of the book, I talk about having so much shame and so much guilt of, what will people think if they knew the truth? What will people think that if they knew that I wasn't actually in a happy marriage? If they knew that there was there was it was very unhealthy, there was toxicity, there was abuse, and I then had to really radically dive into the second component of this bounce factor that I talk about, which is you know coming back to your radical self-awareness of, and this is the self responsibility piece, which is, well, what was your role in this? And I think that
Oh,
that might
wow.
be triggering for some.
That is very triggering, especially when life has not been easy, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that was a huge turning point for me because and that's where everything shifted. And I had to ask the question, what did I need? And what was I doing to protect myself?
No, hold on. I want to stay here for a minute because this is a
Yeah.
very, very, I mean, if you decided to take your life circumstances in your early 30s and blame that on life, no one would blame you, right? You can easily say, look, I've tried my best, but look at what life is throwing at me. It's a very easy place to assign the responsibility externally, right? And
Oh,
and
yeah.
and yet you talk about I'm in a wrong marriage, being abused somehow, and I have to leave, and I have get that realization that I'm in the wrong marriage because I chose something or I did something, and it's part of my responsibility. That's actually life changing for a lot of people when they realize. And I find it really difficult to bring this up all the time, but I always try to hint that at least partially, whatever it is that anyone is going through today, at least partially is the result of something they contributed to the world that they're in. Now, how do you do that when you've lost so much at such a young age? It's you sort of, you have absolutely every excuse to say my life was set out for me and I just had to follow.
Well, I think that there is this idea of, yes, we can sit in the suck, meaning like the
Yeah.
soupy mess that we are in. And there's two schools of thought now that I've kind of been on both sides of the coin. There's the one group where it's easy to say, and I'm sure some of you listening, watching this are probably like, yes, I know that relative who is constantly saying, oh my gosh, my headache is bigger than yours, or yes, and I had this other, massive failure, and I can't believe I can't get anything right. And so they're constantly pinning themselves down, and they're literally sitting in the suck, and they can't get out of it. And there's so many different, they go in a circle, and there's a constant circle, and they just can't take the action to shift their life forward. And then there's the other group, and the other group is, ooh, it's too painful. I'm not going to sit in the suck. Therefore, I am going to do whatever it takes. And you'll see this with these warrior memes, and you'll see this people, doing these extreme sports or extreme, things. You probably even see like military memes that are, I'm so strong, I'm so resilient. And they keep pushing forward. And this is really true in sports as well. You get an injury, all right, let's get back out there on the field.
Mm.
And this is that mentality and the mindset where they don't want to sit in that painful, awful suck because it is too painful. It's unfathomable. It's, oh my gosh, if I even allow myself to feel and experience these awful waves of pain and these feelings, am I going to get stuck there?
Mm.
And we know that now, I mean, this is also in my book, it takes 60 to 90 seconds. This is social scientists have stated that 60 to 90 seconds to fully feel a
Yeah.
feeling. And we're so afraid to feel that sadness. We're so afraid to feel that the jealousy. We're so afraid to feel that betrayal. We're so afraid to feel that rage and anger that we bypass it. We say, "Oh, I know better." And for me, it was very after I fully hit what I'd like to call the full rock bottom, or in part 3 of the book, I call it the fall. I had this big fall, and I knew that, all right, I was getting ignited. There was
Yeah.
this fire under my belly that if I were to stay in this particular relationship, what would happen? Or what's the other thing? And I know for anybody who's been through any sort of abusive situation, I totally understand, and maybe you might want to talk to a somebody that is trauma informed and a mental health specialist to really walk you through this. And there another way? Can you actually step out? It's so much easier to be in a familiar space. And
Yeah.
this is for all of us because change is so hard that we go back to the same kinds of toxic relationships, whether it's friendships, parents, etc., love relationships, because it's safe.
Yeah.
You know the familiar.
Yeah.
You
We, li-
don't
we like
know,
the familiar, even if it's painful, basically.
of course. And you talk about this as well. And when we step out and there's the pain is so great that you have to make a different decision. You get that cancer diagnosis, or you get this weird diagnosis that you've exhausted all of your faculties in the current medical system or wherever you are at, that you are left with a choice. Am I going to walk a different path?
Yeah.
And that's the ignition. That's the second stage of this fly forward framework. And then we get into the third stage, which is you're rising. And for me, it was leaving my house haphazardly in the middle of the night. Then a few days later, of course, being able to let my brother in. And then, of course, going and hiring a lawyer, standing before a judge. I mean, all of this is also in my book in detail. But then there was this space of really allowing myself to feel about a 10 to 12 years of pain that was literally in the back closet, of grief, of anguish, of pain, that it just had nowhere to go. And
Yeah.
so then it's here. And I was wailing, I was screaming, I was crying, I was moaning, I had a full, cathartic experience, almost like these emotions really took over me. But that's when I started to fully release. And not only that, it cascaded the next 6 years of working with several different kinds of, whether it was talk therapy, whether it was, uh, you know, cognitive behavioral techniques, whether it was psychedelics, whether it was, um, emotional freedom tapping, and really diving into emotions, sitting with different types of elders, wisdom, sages, shamans, going back to ashrams where my dad went when he was young, and I always resisted it. Going
Yeah.
back to these places and really paying reverence and homage to sitting in my own spirituality. And this is where kind of that spiritual connection really deeply began for me, because I was raised in a, multicultural,
Yeah.
multi-religious house, and of course in a melting pot of Chicago where we went everywhere. We
Yeah.
uh, Many of our close friends, we were in the mosque, we went to Gurdwara, we went to church. My mom was a Catholic, I was a recovering Catholic. Uh, so but that's where then you ask, from how do you go from victim to victor? This is that personal responsibility piece. I needed to look at my current environment to say, okay, this is not going to fly. And that is the
Yeah.
third
This
aspect
is not
of your bounce
sustainable.
factor.
Yeah.
It's not. And what is this common denominator? Well, the common denominator is myself. And what is that core wound that I'm still kind of surfacing? And that core wound was abandonment. That core wound was, am I good enough? That core wound was, is anyone going to love me? Well, we got to start loving ourselves. And I
Yeah.
know it sounds cliche, but it really starts at that root of, I had to reframe some of the things that I learned when I was younger, which was happiness means working for everybody else. Well, if you're still working for everybody else and working on their happiness, but you're not internally happy, and you're not internally focusing on how to pour into you and recognizing what your nervous system feels like, recognizing, are you feeling safe in this container of a discussion that we're having? Then that's where we need to really build that fourth muscle a little bit, which is our radical self-awareness.
I mean, in your personal case, you had a level of abuse, let's say, or hardship that sort of woke you up. And I know of many others who, um, got to that same point of I can't take this anymore, right? We tend to lie to ourselves so often and say no, I can, I took this before, I'm okay with it, this is how my life is, I can continue. What would be the most important signal for someone to connect deeply, to find that idea of no, I mean, do we really have to go through that hardship, or can we find out maybe in the luxury of having a good loving life and a good relationship? And why is it that we have to suffer that much to wake up?
So, and this is a brilliant question, because I think that, especially in this day and age, when we're talking about good vibes all day, or manifesting the life that we want,
Yeah.
and there's not gonna be any hardship or work ethic for it, because things are just gonna flow and ease.
Yes.
Uh, it's a yes and.
Yeah.
It's a yes and. I don't wish anybody to go through, some of the depth, some of the pain that obviously now collectively we see in the world. And there's a lot of that pain. And then when we
It is
go
a
into
lot.
our own personal suffering, there's there is that. And this is not to say somebody who has small t traumas or big T traumas that they vary, because all of us will experience some sort of slight, some sort of trauma. And the these ruptures, which is what I like to kind of refer to them now as, they are these building blocks to help us build that, of course, that inner wisdom, so that we can expose ourselves to finding love again, so that we can expose ourselves to trusting someone again, so that we can expose ourselves to finding forgiveness within ourselves and within the other, because this is the basis of our human experience. It's our interpersonal relationships. This is the biggest commodity that we have. We're not meant to be monks living, on a mountain somewhere, not interacting with anybody. And I feel like it's why I have so much reverence when I come back to Dubai or even India or even the Philippines, is we are doing life relationally together in as a collective. And I think many times it's easy to say, I'm just going to forget the world and I'm going to isolate because I don't trust anyone. I don't I don't want to get hurt again. I don't want to be betrayed again. I'm not going to do business with anybody. I'm going to just keep it all to myself because I don't know what that person's going to do. And
Yeah.
we contract, we close up, we harden instead of allowing ourselves. And this is the beauty, and this is where the idea of not just the strength of resiliency, but when we think of to bounce back, we're also thinking about the flexibility, the agility, the adaptation for us to
Yeah.
be able to flow through life, sometimes bigness, and how then we can integrate and transmute and alchemize some of the things that perhaps maybe have knocked us down. And I love this kind of segue, because in the fly forward method that I talk about in part 3 of the book, it's really about, when you have a fall, because inevitably we're all going to have a fall. How big or how small, it depends, but we're all going to have a fall. And what meaning you make of it after, that's the kicker. Because
Mm.
I could have made a meaning in my life, like you said, Mo, that, life is too hard. I'm going to just skip this one out. I'm going
Mm.
to, and I've known friends,
Of course.
who've taken their life, going through big tragedies. And there's also people who do not then trust the world again, or they're just stuck in this victim mindset. And if it's you listening to this right now, there is another way. There's another way, because there's baby steps. Because maybe today is that ignition. That's step 2. Today's that ignition. You're listening to something. You have a nudge from somebody else. Somebody told you to, get the book, That Sucked Now What. Maybe you learn this from another friend or another nudge. These are the signs. This is what we pay attention to, right? Because
Yeah.
you are ready. You're opening yourself to a whole new possibility. So that's step 2. Step 3 is when we're getting into this whole idea of rising, which were wobbly. And I know that even after my, just leaving the friends that I knew, leaving the house that I knew, starting completely over, I was still in fear. My trauma response was so high. It was very messy before it became okay. I had to move several times because I was in fear of just being followed, etc. It was not an easy time by any means.
Yeah.
Yet to trust even yourself that, okay, yeah, you know what? I am going to take that improv class. I need to feel a little bit lighter because things around me are feeling a little heavy.
Yeah.
So to do to do new things, and do we need to go through hardships? Well, that's the beauty. That's the juice. That's the juice. Can we avoid the bigger ones? Well, I hope that's my hope within this book. That suck now what is that the blow is a little softer, that we're not just, you know, running into the wall or beating ourselves up or ruminating around the decisions that we made. Yes, it's in the past. This is why the title is That Sucked. It's not This Sucks,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
that would mean that we're still kind of in the process of what sucked. But I'm giving you a mantra of saying that sucked. Now what? And to say, now I'm not denying that part happened. I'm not denying your experience of what actually went down. I'm acknowledging it, but I'm also saying, what's your next chapter? What's the now what? What are we going to do next?
You seem to put a lot of emphasis on spirituality. Is that a necessary part of it? Why is spirituality important?
So I think it's really it gives us our, or at least, what I've seen even now in many of the businesses that I'm in. I think that spirituality has given me life. And I think even now as we go through the studies on longevity, and people who live in the blue zones, to 100, one of the things that they have in their full well-being and their full ability to live to become a centenarian is the fact that not only do they have rich relationships and friendships, and which is why I talk a lot about being able to repair and have these brave conversations, just like you and I are having. The other big thing is to be able to have a sense of some sort of faith,
Yeah.
that to be able to connect the dots of, well, who am I now? What is my purpose here? And it doesn't have to be this big mission to impact a million lives. It could just be, I'm going to be the best friend that I can be for this person, or I'm going to be, the best mom that I can be, or I'm going to focus on really hoping that we can alleviate the pain of humanity in some way. It could be audacious goals, it could be minor, but to have that sense of purpose, that sense, the Japanese, of course, they call it the ikigai.
Yeah.
In, the Vedic philosophy, we call it dharma.
Yeah.
What is your life's work? And I really believe many of our points of our hero's journey or our heroine's journey is really to wake us up to the becoming of ourselves, to really understand, okay, who am I in this stage and phase of life? And that's kind of the beauty. And this is what I asked you guys on my podcast too. It's like I always end with kind of that question is, who are you in this stage and season of life?
Yeah.
Because we're constantly evolving. And if we were meant to be stuck at, the same place, I don't think we would be having this conversation right now.
I think that's really key because the whole concept of this is not waste. Hardship is not a waste of your life. Hardship actually is probably your entire life. That when you go through those things, as Alice was saying on your podcast, it's either because life wants you to change something outwardly or inwardly. It's like, you have to heal something or change some of your behaviors, right? And it's quite interesting when you really look back at those moments in your life and really assess all of the pain and all of the benefit of making you the person that you are, you end up eventually saying, well, do I really want to change that? Do I want to take it back? Looking at it from this vantage point. Okay. And it's quite difficult because for most people, if you give some kind of hardship enough years, for most people, not all people, some people still, assume the victim's mentality. For most people, they'll say, no, I'll take the hardship again if it means that I get to where I am, the purpose of where the purpose for which I came to this life needed that learning experience so that I become this person. And I think this is really where most people miss the point. They, yes, of course, we don't want the pain, we don't want the hardship, but we still want the gain. And somehow they seem to be associated.
Oh, 100%. I think that's the beauty and the contrast of life, isn't it? We have the duality. We
Yeah.
have these necessary paradoxes. And I think that, it's even we take the weather. If it was sunny all day, we would take it, we would fully take it for granted.
Yeah.
And yet when we have a week of rain or the thunderstorms, then when that sunrise comes, that first sunrise, you're like, oh yeah, this is what it's all about. And I think that sweet nectar of that, metaphor is also present even in our daily lives, right? The next love on the horizon. You just got married again, and even me
Oh, yeah.
finding and me finding the love of my life, right? Again, after trusting in myself and in that experience, I think for whoever is, in that crossroads or intersection, know that there there's a bigger play here, and every single thing that has happened in your life has led you to where you are today, whether it's listening to
Yes.
this conversation, whether it's maybe making you question something in your life, maybe it's making you think completely differently or have a different perspective, but it's all led up to allowing you to even, be in this energy. And even you and I, there have been times where I think we could have had this conversation several different points, but I think
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
even yeah, and even now, I think it's even, the best time. So I think that it's allowing yourself to uh, trust that timing, but we have to also be aware of that. And if you're asking the questions, for those of you listening and watching, maybe there's something else that is beginning to unravel for you, and that's something to really pay attention to. Because like you said, Mo, it's not wasted. It's
Yeah.
actually one of the most beautiful things that we can actually garner from our experience of life, is that these hardships can turn into magical moments if we allow them to. And yet the pain and the hurt we can actually transform into beautiful moments, whether it's, and this is the last part of the fly forward framework, is when you get into that magnify stage, you are mostly, maybe it's you're giving back to other people, maybe you're volunteering at an organization, maybe you're taking time out of your week to spend time teaching other people. I remember for me, when I got out of that abusive relationship, I started a nonprofit. It wasn't going to be the biggest nonprofit in the world, but I started something to kind of start giving back. And it was called, the project was called Independent Awakening. And it then became a mission for, young girls and young women of color in the US, to give them a place to really build the skills of confidence and the tools for them to step into their self love. And so it starts with our inner game, but then we start to collectively contribute
Yeah.
to the
It's
masses.
it is staggering really with, when you recognize this. You mentioned love, and Hannah and I were actually working on we now call it finders keepers and finding love together.
Oh,
And
that's so sweet.
it's a lovely project that when most of my listeners will know I worked on this book for love and romance for a very long time. And every time I finish it, I feel that it's not ready. And, Hannah coming in as with her therapy background basically sits down with me and says, oh, no, no, no. You see, this is because you're saying it this way, that doesn't include exactly the person's, own script and own story and so on. It's becoming a lot richer. But it is, today we were discussing that idea of accountability once again. So even when it comes to our romantic relationships and being in an abusive or a wonderful relationship anywhere in between on the spectrum, uh, we tend to always blame the other uh, guy. It's like, or either other girl. It's like, even in my mind, there were scripts that were saying, oh, it's because women will expect this or women will want that, or, that generalization of women is because of my own sample size, which was attracting what I needed in my life, what I needed to learn. And, then you really, at a point in time, you have to take that accountability and say, what am I contributing to this?
Mhm.
Why is life treating me this way? Right? Why is it that I am, stuck in that almost Groundhog Day like cycle of have I delivered the purpose for which the hardship is arriving? I think is the big question. I want to close with it's a comment, not a question. It's sort of rhetorical, but I want to say it. I mean, isn't it quite audacious to say joy in chaos? Like, shouldn't it be that, that sucked now what, how to survive chaos? Embrace joy in chaos. Isn't that a bit too much to ask when people are going through the tough times?
So this was actually also inspired when I entered motherhood. And this was kind of the next level or the next iteration of me really, and I think for, a lot of people really going through
The
significant
chaos.
change.
The chaos of
significant
motherhood.
significant change, chaos. And whether you're moving, whether you are, kind of in the intersection of a full change, things can be chaotic. And I think
Yeah.
it's so easy to diminish the feeling of that because we want to shut it down. We want to shut it
Yeah.
down. And our society has really told us that these big feelings have no place. And when I was going through the throes of motherhood with my son, and then this was during COVID, and I started to have these brave conversations. Our family, we were living in LA at the time, and we were going through, really the heavy lockdowns. And we decided as a family, my son was, at this point, he was 2, and we decided to move completely
Mm.
and uprooting our lives. And this too, I was pregnant with my daughter, and I had the most like horrendous, sickness. And it was everything, every life happenings, like happening all consecutively. We started another company, and I was almost submitting my book proposal, and we're moving at the same time. I mean, it was just every single area of life.
Yeah.
And I think for many of us, when we're going through life transitions in whatever way, shape, or form, it can be chaotic. But my question is, can we find the slivers of joy in that process? Can we find the slivers of joy just like when we're going through loss? And there's a beautiful graphic towards the end of my book around the dualities. Can you be open in finding love, like we were just talking about, you and Hannah, but maybe still a little skeptical and reserved?
Mm.
Absolutely, those feelings can exist at the same time. So,
Mm.
why couldn't you, especially if you're in this maybe season of life that maybe you did start a new business and maybe you did find love, because that tends to happen all at the same time. And maybe you are having traction in whatever project is going on, but maybe you started to have a family. Life is going to throw these curveballs. And
Yeah.
are we going to say, no to the chaos? I'm allowing you to say, yes, it's going to suck. Maybe you're going to suck at something new. And maybe it's not going to be that bad because you know what? We've acknowledged it. Because most of the time, when we are thinking about a thought, when we are allowing it to ruminate or thinking about the process in which how that conversation should have played out or the conversation with asking for a raise, etc., but we didn't do a good job and then we beat ourselves up, it's here. But what if we actually acknowledged it and shared it out loud to release the pressure valve of our mind to say, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. I am
Yeah.
feeling X. I am not X. I'm not anxious as a person, as a being, as an identity. I am just feeling this way. And so that's been my hope is yes, to poke fun and to make it light because I have gone through a lot of dark. And as many of
Mm.
your listeners,
Yeah.
I and I think I see your face and I see you, Mo, and you're also just we're softies on the inside. I
No,
think
that's not true. I am a very I'm a monster. That's who I am.
I
People
don't think
dealing with
so.
me should know that. Yeah.
But I think can we actually have levity in, finding magic in the mess while we're embracing the joy and chaos? And that's what I mean by that.
Isn't that what it's all about? I actually will close on this because you see the funny bit is you can find joy in everything. Nothing ever comes all bad or all good, right? We know that for a fact. But the bit that is so puzzling for me is that the pain will remain to be the pain, whether you lighten it up or not. Okay. The loss will remain to be the loss, whether you lighten it up or not. It's like, you can soften the blow a little bit by telling yourself, and where is the joy in that? Like, where are the good parts? I have to tell you openly, when I went to, my brother's funeral, to be there,
Yeah.
basically to receive people, uh,
Mm,
all of the hugs and all of the people that I haven't seen for 20 years and all of the real, you feel the real empathy and compassion and love of people. And being there with my nephews and nieces, and being there with my mom, and the coffee that I have in the morning with my mom afterwards, and the deep conversation, and the memories that we shared with Amr and Sahar, and and it really is quite interesting because those are also true. You see that the loss is true, and the pain of missing him and my sister, I don't call her my sister-in-law, is true. But all of that other, com, you know, compensating love, if you want, all of those others that come to our lives are also true. Like, why are we ignoring those? You know what I mean? And
so
and it
true.
becomes quite interesting when we would have the tendency to choose to focus on one side and not the other, and yet blame life for our sufferings. It- it-
Right.
you know, it's quite interesting that life is saying, hey, by the way, it's just a sweet and sour, right? Don't just eat the sour, just also eat the sweet with it, and together they're an interesting thing, right? and,
It's
and we go
true.
like, no, it's too sour, we don't want that. And it's
Mm.
so interesting how humanity does this. I love that courage that you have in this book to say, don't just live through it, don't just be resilient, but find the joy. I think that's a big statement.
It's huge. It's
Yeah.
huge. And I just want to say thank you for this amazing conversation and honoring, your audience and the way that you show up and your passion and your dedication. It's just
Oh my!
it's amazing to
I,
see. Thank you,
you
Mo.
you make it look like a job. I know this. I love this. Oh my God, I love this. Um, uh, I cannot thank you enough for being here after such a long trip. And Nita, you've always you've always been the example of what you preach. You show up positively. You're always looking at life with an optimistic lens that I think is fantastic and something to learn from. And thank you for your time. Thank you for your for what you shared. Thank you for your time when you were here in Dubai.
That was
And
fun.
yeah, and this has been an incredible conversation. Yeah, for all of you listening, I very grateful for the chance that you give me to just book some of my good friends for a catch up and then have you guys watch it and calling that a podcast. So yeah, I love you all for giving me the chance to do that. I love you all for really. I realize more and more how diligent some of you are to actually listen every Sunday or watch every Sunday evening. And I think that's really wonderful that those conversations happen to be important to you. Do share them, do spread them. It does make a huge difference when more people are watching the podcast or listening to it. So please do that. And yeah, find a bit of time to look at your own life, take your own accountability, love your own fate, and take the action and flow. I think that's really the answer to living a life of joy despite the hardship. I love you all for listening, and I will see you next time.